Hello, welcome back to the channel. Nigel with you, Nigel's Modelling Bench. As promised, I said I was going to do a video on the 707. So I've looked around a few places, watched a few videos and made a few notes. Much of the information I've got can be found on Wikipedia, and most of it is corroborated. It's quite good. Normally Wikipedia can be a bit funny, but I've got a load of pictures to show you, which I've got from Wikipedia. And when we get into the kit part of the video, all the pictures there I got from ScaleMates. So the Boeing 707, I do have notes. I'm going to be looking down, and I know it's unprofessional, but I'm not going to be doing this. And I'm not going to be reading an auto cue, which is what everybody reading in the news does these days. So back in 1949, 1950, Boeing were looking at entering the civilian as well as the military markets. As you know, mainly their money was in military stuff, but they wanted to get into the jet age with a jet airliner. So as you know, we discussed it in the last video on the KC-135, well, not the last video, but the one before that. They started work on the Project 36780, and that was in 1952. They decided that the first airliner would have a 7 prefix, and the marketing department decided it would be 707. So it sounds good, 707. James Bond. So there we go. It would be powered by Pratt & Whitney JT3s, which is a civilian version of the J57. Yes, very, very smoky things. But they were the same engines as powered the B-52. So in 1952, as I say, Project 36780, or Dash 80, which became to know Dash 80, was rolled out. It launched in 1952 and rolled out in May 1954. And then it first flew on July the 15th, 1954, and had a faultless initial test. This aircraft basically became the KC-135, but it was built with different materials, and there was a lot of spot welding rather than riveting going on. So, you know, when people say, I've said this a few times in the last few videos, when people say the KC-135 is an old 707, it's not. The KC-135 actually came out before the 707. Although the Project 36780 does have 707 written on the tail, it's not effectively a 707. It's a one-off. The 36780 is a one-off. It was it was much narrower. So in August 1955, the great test pilot Tex Johnston, performed a barrel roll in this bloody thing, and he was told off and told not to do it again. And his response was, "Well, you told me you want to sell aircraft, so, you know, what do you expect me to do? I mean, yeah, go and barrel roll an airliner, you know." Great. So that was quite an amazing thing. So the 367, the Dash 80, was 132 inches wide, and it was only 4 seats. And then they actually decided to make that 144 inches wide, which was big enough for 5 seats, but the airlines wanted 6 seats. So they made it 148 inches wide, which is 1 inch wider than a DC-8. So that bred the 707-120. Okay, so the 707-120 was, its first flight was in the 20th of the 12th, 1957, and it was the initial standard. It was known as the 720. Qantas ordered a shortened version called the 707-138, and we'll go through pictures later on, which gave a better range, obviously. Then the 707-320 came along, and that enabled Europe to USA direct flights, and also USA to Japan non-stop. And then that was then fitted with the JT4A engines, which was a development of the JT3. The final 707 was the 707-320C, which had a large cargo loading door, much like the KC-135. And it was, the C was stood for convertible. No, it didn't have a drop top. You could change it around inside for seating, cargo, you know, 50-50, 70-30, whatever. And it was the last one. It had revised wing design with 3-section leading edge flaps, and lots of other little changes as well. Production for this aircraft went from 1958 to 1978, but the line remained open until 1991 for the E3, E6, E8, those sort of variations of aircraft. So the 707, it actually lives on. The 737 uses a modified fuselage, nose and cockpit. I mean, the cockpit in a new 737 is probably nothing like any 707 ever made, but the actual sheet metal work is shared. The 727 uses the nose and cockpit too. And the 757, I was surprised to see this, the 757 used the 707 fuselage cross-section. So I'm guessing the cross-section of a 757 is the same as a 707. I didn't know that. So as mentioned earlier, the original 707s had JT3C engines, which were basically J57s. But those were soon replaced by the JT3D, which was called the TF33. That was the first commercial engine to have clamshell thrust reversers. So there you go. If you want to see those working, go and look at. There's lots of old classic 707 videos on YouTube, and there's quite a recent one where a guy is filming out the window, and you can see all the way through the flight over in Iran. He's filming it, and you can see the engines with the forward, you know, the extra door flaps open on the front to let more air in, and then he also shows the reverse thrusters as well. So yeah, the aircraft was the first order ever for the 707 came from Pan Am on the 13th of the 10th, 1955. And the first aircraft was christened on the 17th of the 10th, 1958. In February 56, TWA ordered 8 off 720s, and their first flight was on the 25th of January, 1959. And during 1959, this is an interesting point, TWA, Continental, United, Delta and Eastern all ordered DC-8s. And they lost market share because the DC-8 was delayed and everybody was getting their 707s. So and it was also worth noting there was no class then. There was no first class, normal class. You know, it was all just one expensive ticket because they could charge what they liked because everybody wanted to fly. So in the 1960s, the 707 became the victim of its own success. Bigger capacity was required. Everybody wanted to go and fly all over the world, and there just weren't enough seats in the aircraft to satisfy this. And of course, they wanted to get the prices down. They wanted to make it more available, fill the planes up and everything. So rather than mess around with longer 707s that would have required upgraded undercarriage and changes to wing design and stuff like that, Boeing said, sod it, we're going to build a 747. And they risked their company's future on the 747, and what a success that turned out to be. The final flight by a US carrier was TWA on the 30th of the 10th, 1983. There was a Lebanese airline that flew 707s to the end of the 1990s. Laid of Argentina flew until 2007, and Saha of Iran used the 707 until April 2013. So remember, the last production was 1978, so that was 35-year-old aircraft still being used commercially. The military versions remain today, of course, as we all know. So basically the variants, well, the first was the 707-020 after the Dash 80, and this was 9 feet shorter than a 707-120, and it was much like a KC-135-80 or a Dash 80 from the pictures I can see. I can't find any details on how wide it was, but it looks very much to me like a KC-135. So in the 707-120, that was the first aircraft to have the figure of 8 fuselage, and it carried 189 passengers. The 707-138 was 10 feet shorter. This was bought by Qantas to extend the range, as I mentioned earlier. And there's a picture there of John Travolta's aircraft. Then the 707-220 came along, which was designed for hot, high-altitude flying. And only 4 were ever delivered to Braniff Airways. So, and then they didn't bother with them after that because the new engines came along on the 707-320. Which will also carry 189 passengers, but it had 2 classes. Now they come in with standard and first class. It had a taller wing, had bigger tailplanes, and had a longer wing as well. There were also changes to the trailing edge, sawtooth designs and stuff like that. 707-420 was identical to the 320, but it had Rolls-Royce Conway engines. And then the 707-320B, once again, they modified the wing again. And then, as mentioned earlier, the 707-320C, the convertible, was the passenger freight change around one. That was the last. This was something I found interesting. They designated one aircraft 707-700. And this was a test bed for CFM56 engines, which of course we know went on to be fitted to the AWACS and 135s, the EC, the AC, the KC and all that. But it was dropped. And why do you think it was dropped? Because they thought the old 707s would challenge orders for the 757 and 767 if they were fitted with CFM56 engines. So money and marketing is what plays the game, isn't it? So going on here, the variants, the military variants. So first of all, we had the C-137 Stratoliner, which was generally, they were built new or they were retired 707-300s, and they were used by the US Air Force for transportation of VIP staff, whatever. And then we had the E3 Century. First went into service in 1977, but as I mentioned earlier, they kept factories open till 91. So some of those aircraft would have been made in 91 or 1990 certainly. And in April 2022, the US Air Force announced they'll be replaced by the E7 Wedgetail in 2027. The RAF retired their E3s in 2021, and the plan was, if you look at anything from 2021, it says the E7 will come in service in 23, and there'll be 5 of them, and now it's 3 of them, and they're coming into service in 2025, starting testing in March 24, but I don't know if any of that's actually happened or whatever. I have seen pictures of them in the RAF, you know, in the UK, but they're Australian aircraft, so whatever. And a lot of people like to shout about the E3 Wedgetail is an Australian aircraft and the equipment is Australian and everything. I don't think it is, okay? I think the Australians put out a requirement for that aircraft and the Americans answered that requirement. I'll stand corrected if I'm wrong, but from what I can gather, all of the stuff that's in it is all American. I believe the E7, not like the P8 Poseidon, the E7 is taken from the production line, hence having the windows all the way down the fuselage, some of them being blocked off, obviously. But it's taken from the 737-700 production line, and then the first 2 Australian ones are actually old airliners. They're modified old airliners. So I believe the aircraft are built empty. They are then taken to Australia where the Australians fit them out. Whether the equipment inside them is Australian or what, I do not know. But I would hazard a guess it's not from what I've been reading, but I will stand corrected as I say. But Australians are very, very patriotic and very, very proud of everything they do and tend to get very, very sort of patriotic is the word I'm looking for. And they do start to shout. So there we go. So yeah, the E3 Century is going to be out by 2027, or start disappearing by 2027. The E6 Mercury, it's an airborne command post, and that replaced the EC-130 and the EC-135s. So that's cool. And then the E8 Joint STARS. STARS is Surveillance Target Attack Radar System, and that was retired last year in 2023. And then, of course, we had the Boeing 707 was also used as Air Force One from 62 to 98. And then the 747s came along, obviously. So basically, that is it. Let's have a look at some kits. Okay, so looking at kits, again, I've got a list here. Do not, I said this in the KC-135 videos, do not confuse this kit with the KC-135s. This is a Heller tooling. Okay, the 707 was originally tooled by Heller in 1/72nd scale in 1985. And then I'll go through all the variants now, the different manufacturers that use that tooling, bought the parts from Heller. I don't know what they did. The manufacturers, it's like you'll know that, for example, Revell. Revell will box an Academy kit, and they've bought the sprues in the bags from Academy and shoved them in a Revell box. Other times they will borrow the tooling. So you will get Revell moulded plastic in Academy's borrowed tooling. So it's worth checking up, because I can assure you the Academy mouldings are a lot better than the Revell ones. If you take the 1/32 scale BF 110, for example, compare the Dragon kit to the Revell kit, there is no comparison. Take the old OH-58 Kiowa helicopter in 35th scale, it's Academy plastic in a Revell box. So yeah, do not confuse this model with the AMT KC135 EC135 range. They are not the same kit. The KC EC135 is smaller than a Boeing 707. Okay, so the first production was from Heller Humbrol, okay, in 1985, and then it was re-released in 96, 99, 16 and 2021, so only 3 years ago. And that was a 707 Air France, Lufthansa or BA, the little different options. So that was what, depending what year it came out, you had the different options. But generally, I think it was Air France or Lufthansa was the main options in that kit. But they did do one in a BA option. In 1986, they released Air Force One, which is probably quite a valuable kit now. Then in 1987, Heller released the AWACS with the JT3D engines. And then in 1987, Gunsangu also released the AWACS. So it's Heller plastic in a Gunsangu box. And then Airfix in 1990, 1992 and 1994 released the E3D Sentry, which is the CFM 56 engined aircraft. And then in 1993, Heller released the E3B AWACS. And then in 97, they did a 707-300B TWA. Then in 1998, they did an E3F, E3B AWACS. And then in 2000, they did the same kit, but with NATO markings as well. And then in 2017, they did an E3A-C AWACS. So that's the old TF-33 engines. And they also did that kit as a model set in 2022. If you go to Amazon UK now, if you're in the UK, you can get the E3A/C, and they're doing 0% finance for 3 months for 12 quid a month. So it's a bargain. If they've got any left. I've just ordered one, so you'll be seeing a review of that shortly. But yeah, 0% finance. I'd buy bloody bread on 0% finance if I could. So that's basically all the kits that are available. Obviously, nothing is currently in production. But you can look around on eBay, you can look around in various second-hand sellers, and you will find these kits. You'll probably find them in some shops as well, and you'll find them at shows. Just be very careful. If you are buying, you know, if you see an old 1985 release Air France 707, chances are the decals are shot. Now, if you're looking at the old AWACS kit from 1987, doesn't really matter if the decals are shot, because you'll probably have some decals lying around, you know, US Air Force or whatever. But yeah, it's worth looking around. The Heller E3B, some of those have the lovely camouflage in as well, I think. But yeah, worth looking around and making sure you get the right one that you really, really want. And as I say, the later ones, I mean, Heller have just been revamped, haven't they? They've been bought out and they're being re-released. So yeah, 2022. And I think now I mean, probably Scalemates have missed out on it, but I think there's a kit available now that's probably current production, which is the one I've ordered, which is available on Amazon right now. So there we go, guys. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope you managed to stay awake through it. But if you're interested in the 707, then you might have been modelling and had me on in the background and listened to stuff. But it's very interesting to see all the different kits that have been released. As I say, very shortly I will be doing a review of the AWACS that I've got from Heller. and I'll be talking about the aftermarket for that as well. I did a video yesterday on the KC135 stuff and showed you the aftermarket there that's not for that kit, it's for this one. So we'll go through that in a bit more detail as well. So I'll see you all soon for that one. And also I've just realised it's the 1st of September. I need to do a monthly roundup, don't I? So I'll probably do that tomorrow now on the 2nd of September. So I'll see you for that. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.